Decisions.
Wait a minute. Are you still looking for cars on Carvana?
Yeah, decisions.
When I used Carvana, I found the exact car I was looking for in minutes. Bought it on the spot.
Electric or full diesel? Decisions.
Come on, you've been at it for weeks. Just buy it already.
You're right. Crossover it is. Decisions decided.
Whether you know exactly what you want or like to take your time, buy your car the convenient way with Carvana.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. Join one of the most iconic names in wealth management, Merrill. You'll be part of a dynamic team of advisors and specialists working hard every day to grow their clients' wealth. And with the support of best-in-class research, advanced digital tools, and the resources of a global institution, it's truly an opportunity you can be bullish about. Learn more at careers.bankofamerica.com. Copyright 2024, Bank of America Corporation.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Do you know what, Kieran? I believe I said the farewell to the last pod and the intro to this one in the same breath. I don't think we've ever done that before, Kieran, so let's not pretend we've been apart for a couple of days, because we haven't. We've got an interview today, Kieran, and I know I always say this and people take the mickey out of me. Always saying this is one of the most interesting interviews we've had for a long time, with a fascinating man, Conrad Kirkwood, who's president of the Irish Football Association. And this is what he had to tell us about football in Northern Ireland, and in particular, the collapse of the funding for the Casement Stadium, which would have seen Northern Ireland hosting games at the next Euros. Conrad, thank you so much for joining us. It really is a pleasure to talk to you. We've got a lot to talk about, but let's start with our usual question. Just tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be president of the Irish Football Association.
In my day life, I'm a Department of Finance employee. The president of the IFA is an unpaid role. It's a voluntary role, which is in stark contrast, I think, to most other nations. How did I come to be involved in it? I describe it as progressive entanglement. A long time ago, when I was in my 20s, I was invited onto a committee. A dear friend of mine passed away, and a place came in my local club's committee as a result, and I was invited to join the committee. And in various sort of stages over years, people tapped me on the shoulder and said, should you get involved in the local league, you would be an asset to them. So they invited me onto the local league. Then I got invited onto a bigger league. Then I went on to a divisional association. We've got 4 divisional associations geographically in Northern Ireland. You might call them regional associations. And then when we had competency in the articles, a requirement that you were competent and you were interviewed to be a board member, I thought, well, I do a lot of governance. Governance was the issue with the IFA at the time. I thought, why don't I apply to be a director? And I became a director of the Irish Football Association for 9 years. And of course, I became vice chairman. And then I stepped off when my 9 years was up. And basically someone tapped me on the shoulder again, several people, when the presidential elections were coming up, and suggested that I might be well placed to run. So I did, and I've now been in post. We're elected, presidency are elected every year, so I'm in my 4th term and really enjoying it. So I'm an amateur football person, a grassroots person, rather than a professional game person.
I'm going to come on to the grassroots thing later, because it's been grassroots week recently in the UEFA. Yeah. I've made a note of that phrase, progressive entanglement, because that describes a lot of things that happen in the mind. And did you see Kieran's face light up when you said you were a finance officer? That was
well, I work for the Department of Finance. I actually work in HR in the Department of Finance, so I do.
Now my face is lighting up, because that was my speciality way back before the comedy took over. When you took the job at first as president in 2021, Conrad, you said that you were under no illusions about the challenges ahead. What were those main challenges at that time?
The main challenges would have been, obviously, ticketing was an issue at the start, and that was clearly going to be on the horizon fairly quickly. Pricing and there was a ticketing structure that people weren't entirely happy with at the time, or some weren't. The other challenges lying ahead would have been the desire to bring significant funding into the senior part of our game, the Premier Division, and to the rest of the game. The desire to have a national training centre would be huge. And the fact that it was fairly obvious at that point that we had a team that was very much reaching the end of its years, and trying to sort of manage that transition would be very difficult. So they would have been the biggest challenges. And also I would have to say that I inherited a fairly fractured relationship between a number of different football stakeholders, but that probably every president or every chair who's ever existed would have said that.
Yeah, and of course we were coming out of the pandemic at the time,
Yep.
which had a
Finances were a major challenge.
Yeah. Well, just to give our listeners some context, what sort of budgets are you operating on? What's the sort of financial restraints that you're operating there?
Our total revenue would be about 21 million a year. It's made up kind of in three parts. 1/3 of it will be FIFA and UEFA money that is given to us. 1/3 of it will be media. It'll be an arrangement that FIFA or UEFA rather have negotiated from 2022 to 2028. And the last third will be a mixture of match revenue and commercial revenue. That would be the majority of what we bring in. So there's not too many variables in there that we can work with. The media money, the FIFA money, UEFA money is all fairly static, although it does increase a little year on year. Commerciality in terms of our sponsorship arrangements are pretty much steady state. We lose one, we gain one. Ticketing is really the only thing you can change. And allegations, people would be quick to say you're price gouging, it's outrageous, they'll compare prices. And also times are hard at the moment with inflation.
Yeah, Kieran, I'll bring you in there. That figure of 21 million that Conrad mentioned, how would that compare to, say, the English FA or even the Scottish FA as a fairer comparison, maybe?
Well, a lot is dependent upon qualification for finals. England are in the region of 350 million. So they've got a lot more flexibility in terms of what they can do. Scottish FA this year will be a good year, 2024. But in a non-finals year, they'll probably be looking in the region of probably 40, 50-ish.
Conrad, you've mentioned ticket prices yourself a couple of times now, and that's obviously been a big issue there for your fans, is it?
Yeah, we would have basically a campaign cardholder scheme, which is in around 8 to 10,000 people probably, but probably 8 at the moment. That sets a reasonable price at around £32 a ticket, depending on where you are. And we've a sort of a noisier end, the Cop, which is where the more boisterous fans want to be, with the Railway end, which is really the family stand, and that's where fans want to be. But also, obviously, the nearer you get, there's an element of the nearer you get to the time of the game, the date of the game, some prices go up. So there's quite a lot of misinformation around pricing that's out there. But any attempt to increase on the £32 would be met with a degree of hostility, probably. And also there's the usual stuff around, how much does your ticket provider get from this, and what are their arrangements? All ticket providers, will do it differently, but they all take a slice of the money in the course of things. And that generally leads to complaints from the fans, notwithstanding the fact that you would involve people from the fan side in the award of any contract.
Yeah, you must be doing something right in your job, Conrad, as you say, because you've just been re-elected as president for a fourth one-year term. But does having annual elections for you make long-term planning more difficult?
It is really, really difficult. In the first year, I was opposed by the person who I ran against to get the role. I beat them by more, which was refreshing to find out. It meant that the first year you're doing a lot of the hard work to try and make sure you're talking to the stakeholders, you're meeting people's expectations. In real terms, you're looking over your shoulder. I think most other associations in UEFA will have a 5-year term or a 4-year term. The lowest I think I've heard of is a 2-year term. We are absolutely an outlier. And if there's to be a review of our governance arrangements, which I hope there will be, I'm looking at that at the moment, I would be inclined to make it 2 4-year terms. That being said, I've already said that in the event that they do, I would not run for a second term. Just for the avoidance of doubt, it would be wrong of me to change the thing to suit myself. And into the bargain, it's a very onerous role. It's like having a job on top of a job.
And when you talk about other stakeholders as well, Conrad, who are we referring to there?
It's a mixture. We have our four divisionals, who are the largest voting bloc at council, our equivalent of an assembly. The senior football, the Northern Ireland Football League, who are a big stakeholder in everything. And then we've referees, supporters. They're all people from the women's game are all represented on council. It's also recognising that the people sent to council aren't the only voices. It's making yourself available and going out around Northern Ireland as much as possible to meet as many people as possible. I think with regard to the supporters, I remain to be proved wrong, but I may be unique as a president in that in away games, I go to the away end before the game. I stand outside and I talk to the supporters. I'm not aware that there's any other president who does that, certainly. And it was useful. We had some difficulties in Spain where the police were quite awkward. I was able to use what little Spanish I have to good effect to try and persuade them that our fans were merry but not difficult. That would be the nature of them. We've very good fans. So I enjoy a good relationship with our supporters. They challenge me from time to time, let's be clear, but a good relationship. And I'd even sit down where possible and have a pint wherever they congregate before the match the day before. So I try to do that. And that kind of simple stuff, I think, with stakeholders, wherever I'm invited, wherever I try to go, whatever it is, I'll try to be there. And no matter how small the invite is, how small the organisation is, you always learn something when you're out there.
You had some issues in Bulgaria as well, didn't you, with fairly robust policing?
Yeah, I think they kept the fans inside the ground for longer than was needed, probably. We have contacted UEFA about that. I think there's also the difficulty, and it's some countries don't allow you to bring your own police representatives over. And my general feeling is there's a better relationship emerges when our police are respected and able to deal with their police. We would always invite the opposition countries' police to us. So I think that was something that we missed out on then, and we would really, it's done by invite. You can't sort of push your nose in. It's done by invite, but it certainly makes a difference. I think also there was an element around Bulgaria of people who, whether you would describe them as ultras or otherwise, they were clearly looking to create a bit of trouble. And our supporters have absolutely no history of any trouble. They drink, they party, they dance, they enjoy the game. The end. There's never any trouble from them.
I'm going to talk about your fans at the end because I want to finish on an upbeat note. But I just remember talking to Colin Murray about some of his adventures with the away fans over there. Let's before we talk about the big story, which is Casement Park and the next Euros, I'd like to talk a little bit more about yourself and about your role in UEFA, Conrad. You have a master's in business administration, I understand. Do the normal rules of business apply in football? Are they transferable skills when you find yourself as president of an FA?
I think the skills have been very transferable as president of the FA. It's good to have, strategy is a big part of the MBA. And so looking ahead, although we've got a 1 year presidency each time, trying to look ahead to 5 years, trying to ensure that the organisation plans for 5 years or more ahead is really helpful. Other elements of the MBA, sort of understanding a wee bit more about marketing and that kind of stuff, because it's not in my daily role. My daily role, although I was originally an IT person, my daily role in the civil service revolves entirely around some kind of governance. But I found the MBA useful to expose me to different things. I also went on to do the certificate in football management that UEFA do. And I find that a really, really good experience. That's we were in with people from other federations, other FAs. And it is the sort of marketing element of that is very, very focused on football itself. And, they talk about the uniqueness of football, the uncertainty of outcome in a match and all of that sort of stuff, which makes it sort of unique as a business from others.
You're a member of the UEFA Fair Play and Responsibility Committee and have been for a while. Tell us about that role.
Well, it's now the Social and Environmental Sustainability Committee.
Hang on.
Social and Environmental Sustainability. Yeah, they tried to change it to make it more reflective of the kind of things that it does. My criticism of it would be that there's not enough money in that committee. It doesn't really get an awful lot to work with. The bit that I found most enjoyable in recent years were there was a series of grants for refugee schemes, sort of in and around the 50k mark. initially, I would have been one of the panel appointed its own, or sorry, the committee appointed its own panel to review those, and I found that really, really interesting. We have a smaller refugee uh, group in Northern Ireland than maybe some other countries, but in many ways that makes it worse for them because there's fewer of them compared to the rest of the population. I found it really interesting. What I found maybe most odd was that there were some countries who simply never applied for refugee money. There was a small number of countries who simply, whether they decided they weren't able to achieve it or whether they just weren't interested, I really wasn't sure. So we tried to place an emphasis on getting, your Italy's and your Maltas and countries like that were getting money every year. They knew how to work in terms of trying to work with refugees and trying to get a good application, a good scheme, whereas other countries weren't doing it at all. So we tried to sort of move it towards a preference for countries that hadn't applied before a little to encourage them. The other stuff around there, it's a lot around respect campaigns. I think probably the most tangible stuff I found for Northern Ireland out of that committee, at one stage, Institute Football Club had a flood, which completely destroyed their ground. Their ground has never been usable since. It ended up with Japanese knotweed on the pitch. It ended up with all kinds of problems, and turns out it was on part of a floodplain that hadn't been known so well originally. We were able to get some funding for UEFA to help them to try and find a new location to try and help them resituate themselves. Now, they haven't quite got there. They've got planning permission, but it's that kind of tangible stuff that's really, really useful that committee does. The rest is probably, if I'm honest, it feels like a lot of the stuff is brought to us fully formed, and in many ways I'd like more of an opportunity to influence from the sidelines as opposed to being brought up a fully formed idea from the staff side, albeit the staff side are very good.
There are going to be some AFC Wimbledon fans panicking about that story of Institute and their pitch, because that's a terrible thing. As you say, Conrad, you've taken a special interest in mental health issues and refugee projects. I'm a trustee of Crystal Palace's foundation, and increasingly in the past few years, mental health issues and refugee projects, because Luna House is based in Croydon, so there's a lot of refugees found there. I'm really interested, therefore, what you think football can do around these issues, because we think at Palace and other clubs think football is one of the most important agencies by which you can make a difference in those areas.
It's massive in Northern Ireland, with very high rates of male suicide. It's a known fact, and as a country coming out of conflict, and we are still coming out of conflict, it adds a different level. There's many different ways in which people can find themselves in trouble, maybe owing money to, and we have a different type of organisational crime in Northern Ireland than you might have where you are, which adds a new dimension to it all. I think football, well, for me, I suffer from anxiety. I've never made any secret of that. I've always done. It's not really a major impairment to what I do, but it means I understand a little more. We have the ahead of the game thing that the IFA does. I'm a huge advocate of that. And that's very much a programme where we go wherever we can, wherever we're invited, and we'll explain to people what mental health is, the signs to look for, signpost them to organisations. We'll try and find an individual or a couple of individuals in each club who will agree to be a nominated rep. We've mental health champions, about 20 of them across Northern Ireland, who are a little better informed. The chaplaincy service that we have, I'm a huge supporter of. We've had that, I think it's probably 4 or 5 years now, but I benefited from it myself in that I lost my mother and my uncle last December, and I was also suffering from cancer at the same time myself. I'm fine now, thank goodness. But the chaplain that we had in the IFA was tremendous. I mean, he kind of got me, kind of understood me. It wasn't about religion, it was about the trying to help you. There's loads of very good examples. And on Saturday past, I was supporting in my sort of private role an organisation called the Sports Mental Health Initiative, and a good friend of mine, TJ Young, he just happened to be a manager of my club at one point, started that organisation as a result of a player at another club that he was managing being in a difficult situation and wanting to take their life through suicide. And TJ, although he has no sort of qualifications, he started this organisation. It is helping people day and daily. And there was a really powerful video on Saturday where a player at my own club, or rather a manager at my own club, I used to be a player, was in danger of taking their life through suicide. And there was a major intervention. And that lad, who's in his 30s, was able to do a video and talk about his experience, and it's all very practical. And I think that's the thing for this country. It has to be practical, and we have to make men feel comfortable to share the problems that they're having if they're going to counselling or what are they doing, and we have to create that environment because it wouldn't have been here 10 years ago.
First of all, very sorry to hear about your mother and your uncle. This is probably a question for a different pod, but as you've raised it so much, do you find that your honesty about your own anxiety enables other people to be more honest with you? Does it? I hesitate to use the word credibility, but does it help in communicating with other groups who may be otherwise reluctant to talk about this?
I think in every respect, if you have any kind of lived experience, it straight away sets you apart. But there's an element, it sounds a bit odd to say it, but there's a pastoral element to being president. You meet a great many people along the way. Some of them will be entirely fine. Some of them will have issues. That maybe staff members have got problems. It could be people out there in football. It could be council members. It could be members of the press. Believe it or not, and the most recent thing, and it's known in the public domain. One of our managers from the Premier League here was suffering exactly the same cancer that I had, and was 4 months down the line after me, and I was able to keep him. Didn't know him at the start, got in touch with him because I knew it was the same thing. Kept in touch all the way through, and I would still keep in touch with him now, on and off, just to make sure he's okay. I think it's about being genuine. If you're trying to game that system, you'll look very badly wrong. It's about being genuine. It's about taking the time. And I think as president or in any leadership role in football, you have a marvellous opportunity to improve things, and you should take it, whether it's for individuals or groups. And it's in my nature to want to sort of get involved with things like that, so I do.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at aruba.com.
I think there are so many people in football who are playing that pastoral role without realising that there is a word for what they're doing.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about, it's not necessarily more cheery, but you mentioned grassroots football. And as I said, it's just been UEFA Grassroots Week. How did that play out in Northern Ireland?
Probably didn't get as much publicity as it should. And I think there's so many different weeks. In many ways, through the foundation, every week is Grassroots Week. The foundation does a tremendous amount of work across Northern Ireland to try and give coaches the skills they need to empower clubs through their club accreditation scheme, just to generally support, steer people towards grant funding applications that there are. To give a sense of it, my own club is Wee Village by the Sea, residents maybe 10, 12,000 people. We've our own pitch, our own social club, our own 3G training facility, 250 social members, 13 children's teams, 3 adult teams, and we own our own facilities. And it's quite an undertaking. But through the IFA, you would have support to train your coaches, support on safeguarding. If you're going for a funding opportunity, people you can go and talk to about that. And we've been very lucky at my club. I would estimate in the last 10 years, we've probably secured over £500,000 of funding, which for the first was for 243,000 from government for our training pitch. The biggest since then will have been around 30,000 for a small stand. But every year on year, we gradually pick up grants here, there and everywhere. And you'll improve your fencing, you'll improve your car park, you'll improve your changing rooms, whatever it takes. Most clubs are doing it like that.
So that's interesting. I'll bring Kieran in again here, and I'll be interested, Conrad, in what you have to say after Kieran. So it seems, Kieran, that there is money out there, but it's just a question of letting people know that they can apply for it.
I think there is a lack of awareness at some clubs, so it's great to hear from Conrad that his club and others are becoming more familiar with it. And also there are people who are very good at putting in applications. And if you've got one of those at your club, or if you know somebody who knows somebody, it can make a huge difference in the ability. as you know, I used to play for Trafford Cricket Club and Rugby Club, and we were very good at putting in for grants from a variety of sources. When we were in the EU, from EU grants, in the UK grants, national lottery funding, and so on. So it is a case of trying to organise yourself. And the people that do this don't get any appreciation for the transformation that they make to individual clubs, but they do a magnificent job.
The Amateur League, which is the largest men's league in Northern Ireland, I was associated with up until April there. They ran a very progressive scheme where they invited people who had experience with grants, the kind of people who would normally write your grant application for you. They invited them in for a series of different training courses to try and sort of increase the capacity. In the Amateur League, we would have had clubs like my own who were quite good at getting grants. You'd have clubs who simply weren't interested in grants. They're more they sort of a social element to them rather than they didn't have their own facilities. And clubs in the middle who had aspirations but just couldn't find a way to realise those. So between the IFA and the Amateur League, there are a number of different training courses. People would make the allegation that GAA get more money. Frankly, they're just better organised. They're better organised at getting it, and football needs to be better organised. It's a tough gig when you're competing with rugby and GAA here. The DCMS money from England was quite helpful because that was new money from outside Northern Ireland as part of levelling up, and a great many clubs were quite good at getting that as well. So I agree with you. There are a number of options, number of opportunities, but in reality, the biggest problem for most clubs is tenure. You have to own your own facility. You have to have a lease in your own facility over a period of time. The demographic in Northern Ireland for grassroots, particularly in the city here in Belfast where I live, it would be working class in some areas. They wouldn't own their own facilities. They'd have to get a lease on a long-term basis from the council, which might then free them up to get a grant on that facility to improve it. So we have like junior, intermediate and senior levels of football, and we're looking to introduce a new level between intermediate and senior, which is called conference, and that will stretch the facilities end of things just a little further.
For some of our listeners around the world, Conrad, we should explain that GAA represents traditional Irish sports, but they're also part of the next story, the big story for you recently, as the word funding. I was going to use the word funding as my in for this story, but I used GAA instead because I'm thinking on my feet, Conrad. But the UK government element of the funding for the massive redevelopment of Casement Park collapsed suddenly, it seemed, which means that Northern Ireland at the moment won't be hosting any games at Euro 2028. Was that a complete surprise to you? Had you had a formal commitment from the previous government that the money would be happening?
The previous Secretary of State was very clear that he would just kind of write the cheque for it. There's videos online. I think there's memes even have been created as a result of it. He was very, very, very clear. Then obviously the Conservative government evaporated essentially. It came to a fairly precipitous end at the last. The new government were a little more realistic in the sense that they were, okay, let's see what can be done here, what can happen. Let's do some feasibility studies into what's required, etc. Huge disappointment for us that they came to the conclusion, although we accept that decision. There's nothing else we can do about that. For us, it was a thin line between, Casement Park is an evocative place. It's evocative for a great many people, for good reason. Equally, it's a place where people play sport. For us, it was a pragmatic choice in order to apply to be a part of the Five Nation bid, which it seemed inconceivable that we wouldn't have. We needed a stadium capable of having 34,500 people, and or planning permission for one that was going to be built. Well, there was no planning permission for the National Football Stadium at Windsor Park. There was no funding commitment for the National Football Stadium at Windsor Park. There was various funding commitments from government culminating in New Decade, New Approach, but from as far back in 2011, there were commitments to build Casement Park. So we essentially tried to deliver the only option that was available to us to have a ground in Northern Ireland. UEFA aren't going to have, realistically, they're not going to let us play in an 18,500 seater stadium. So therefore, we took the pragmatic approach. There was an opportunity to bring money into Northern Ireland, an opportunity to increase volunteering opportunities, an opportunity to tout Northern Ireland as a wonderful place to come and visit. I think it's a great place to live. I love going other places, but I couldn't think of living anywhere else. This is as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned. So it's a disappointment to find ourselves in the position we're in.
Can UEFA not be a bit more imaginative about this? I mean, Windsor Park only holds 18,500, as you know, but there are a lot of teams in the Euros now, and a lot of those teams wouldn't fill Windsor Park. So surely it's not beyond the realms of capability to make sure that you have a group where some of the smaller nations are, so you don't need a 36,500 stadium, or is UEFA too big a tanker to turn around in that sort of space?
I think in fairness to UEFA, the criteria were very clear. They're there for a reason. I would imagine, and I'm not close to the thought process there, but by the time you try and work out the ticketing arrangements for the various commercial partners and all of that, and then try and sort of allocate the fans after that, and by the time, for example, at Windsor Park, even trying to find sufficient area in which to put the various cameras that they would have for a game of that status, it just isn't feasible to have an 18,500 stadium. And that's not to say that you don't ask. You do ask. For us at this moment, the obvious question from you will be, well, what's next? We were fortunate in the few days after. It ruined my Friday night, I have to say, in the sense that I was sitting thinking it was a nice quiet Friday night, thinking the news wouldn't appear, and it did.
Yeah.
But as it happened, we were able to get a meeting with the Secretary of State, Hilary Benn, on the Monday, and we were also on a pre-planned trip to UEFA from the Tuesday through to the Thursday. So we were able to sort of try and speak to everybody that was concerned to try and see is there other ways in which we can contribute to the Euros, is there other benefits that we can bring in some shape or form. It'd be too early for me to say what they might be, but what I can say is we were there as quickly as possible after the decision. Some of that was by happenstance. There happened to be a meeting that was there, but other was, Secretary of State making himself available very quickly.
Had work already begun?
Oh, you're always thinking ahead as to what might happen. Yeah. I mean, Patrick Nelson and myself would always have been thinking, what do we do if, for sure. The fans will have already in social media described every possible permutation of every possible idea that's out there. I've yet to see an idea out there that we haven't already socialised in some way ourselves. We don't rehearse it through the media. Line by line was what we're doing, but it would be remiss on our parts not to be looking at every opportunity possible.
But had physical work already begun on Casement Park?
Oh, physical work was mostly ground clearances.
Right, okay.
I think the extent of their liability would have been in around the 5 million mark, but it couldn't be positive in that, but it's a significant undertaking on their part. And I guess for them, they'll be wanting that stadium to happen whenever it happens, at the kind of costs that have been quoted, in excess of 300 million, 400 million. There's lots of different variations out there. That's a massive amount of money, and the English government, British government, would have to bring some money across for that. That would immediately lead, and I'll be very clear about it, if Casement attracts more money than the 36 million that we're waiting for our senior game, which is woefully inadequate. It needs to be 120 at a year ago's costs, and probably a lot more by now. To date, we've received 60 million or so for football in Northern Ireland. That was enough to build the stadium and to rebuild the stadium in 2016. But if Casement was to be getting a big check, ourselves and rugby are already in the public domain saying they need 40 million. We would be asking for the same, and it becomes a very political thing in Northern Ireland at that point. There's political parties have more interest in one sport or another.
We've mentioned the word stakeholders before in a different circumstances. There are other financial stakeholders here as well. The government of the Republic, for example, your own government. Is there no possible chance that the money could be raised from those sources or other sources?
For Casement, it's more a question for our colleagues at the Gaelic Athletic Association, but the Republic's government had indicated they would add more to the piece. I would imagine GAA will add more to the piece if they're trying to get that up and running. There's no reason why they wouldn't think of it. If I was in their position and I had money in the coffers, I'd be bringing a little more money to the piece to try and get it further. I think for local government, which is the last stakeholder in this, the challenge is that's what I would describe as policy in a contested space. The support on the unionist side for Casement is unlikely to be anything like the support on the more nationalist side. And as a result, then this could be something that requires a lot of patient negotiation through the executive, and I wish them all well in the doing of that.
Well, I mean, even the name casement is a bit of an eyebrow raiser for some people. Where you are in the long term, and I don't want this to sound cynical, and I'm aware that this might do. In the long term, though, the stadium was to be mainly used for Gaelic sports. So, in terms of the impact on you, there's less of an impact on the FIA than there probably is on the GAA, isn't there, in the long term?
Well, the IFA, not the FAA.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
It's all right. It's happening all the time.
Yeah, that's because Kieran's always moaning about that other organisation. I apologise.
Yeah, no, there's less of an impact on us for sure. And our stadium, as it stands at the moment, with 18,500, is probably pretty well sized. I mean, for the Nations League, we'd have got about 16,500 of an attendance. For qualifiers, we do better. We're probably closer to capacity on qualifiers. For my own part, I don't know if you've seen pictures of our stadium, we've got small corners that sort of join it up. I refer to them I call them the Johnson corners because a board member that was with us at the time was an architect, and he came up with the idea we should fill them in some way. So I jokingly call them the Johnson corners. If we were to increase those in size a little and redevelop the North Stand, which is 40 years old, we might be able to get above 22,000 in a comfortable thing. And I think for me and the chief executive, I have talked about that a lot. That would be probably the sweet spot for us. Anything bigger than that would be wasteful. And also we have to understand that we share the facility with Linfield. Average attendances at a Northern Ireland Football League game would be in around 3,200. Linfield will probably do better than that on average, but they'll certainly have nowhere near 18,000.
Yeah. Just finally on the casement, was it always an optimistic bid in what seemed like quite a short time frame to get that stadium funded and built in time for the Euros?
I think the clock run down. I think at the start it was less challenging than it became, and with every passing week it became more and more challenging. But I think we were right, and I've reflected on this a lot. I think we were right to consider it. It would have been wrong on our part to just not attempt to be ambitious and not to attempt to do something. And I think we would have learned a lot from the process. And I guess, as Patrick would have said, the chief executive, regret the uncertainty that created for people. That wasn't good. But I still think we needed to think about it and to see could we move forward on that basis.
It must be doubly frustrating, Conrad, because you've just recently hosted a UEFA tournament, haven't you? The under-19s, which was a massive success.
It was a massive success. I made it my business, as is my nature, to talk to as many of the volunteers as possible. I think I managed to shake just about every one of them's hand when they got to Winter Park for the last game. But when I was out and about, I was talking to them, and I never ceased to be amazed. I mean, whether it's somebody in their teens or somebody in their late 70s or 80s, there were people really working hard on it. It certainly captured the imagination. The quality of football was superb.
Yeah.
We did the Super Cup in my first year as president, and that again, we're probably curious, if not nosy, in Northern Ireland, which makes us very welcoming. And I think there was a point at which people didn't come here to visit for very obvious reasons. And I find it really interesting when people come to visit now from different countries and to try and find out. And I think it's our bounden duty to promote this as a destination. We've got Titanic, we've got the Causeway, we've got Game of Thrones, but there's much more to Northern Ireland than that. I mean, Belfast is a very walkable city. It's a very friendly city. Yeah. And I think the opportunity to bring more people into Northern Ireland with those tournaments is phenomenal. But also for our volunteers to give them the opportunity to do what they do very well.
And you've got some of the best Victorian pubs and pub architecture in the UK. I like that. I used to, long time ago, I went out with a girl from Beaver Park. Curious, but not nosy. I'll give you the curious bit. I'll dispute the second bit. It was they wanted to know a lot of information a lot of the time. I want to end on a very positive note, Conrad, and we have briefly touched on it. The extraordinary size and passion of the support for the Northern Ireland international team is incredible, given the size of the nation. Can you explain that? Is there a cultural, sociological reason, or is it just one of those things when they've found a way to have fun by following their national team?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I was a supporter before I became a board member, and even as a board member, I travelled as a supporter. That didn't happen a lot. It's happened a wee bit since. I'm not sure it happened much before then. what I like about traveling with my wife, by the way, as a supporter, I like that sort of sense of fun that they have. They just go find different ways to get their accommodation. They're very imaginative in everything that they do. They're very respectful, albeit they love to sing and they love a drink. I think for us here, it's also that Northern Ireland sense of humour, that self-deprecating. The way we say about the Titanic, it was all right when it left us. And we do say built by an Irishman and sunk by an Englishman sometimes, but we'll pass that one by. But the idea that we used to sing, we're not Brazil, we're Northern Ireland, it's that very self-deprecating sense of humour. The successes that we do have, we celebrate vigorously. I mean, I couldn't go on Friday there, but there was another sort of showing of sort of particular footage of the 1982 World Cup in the background and
Jerry
different people. I watched it. I watched it a while ago. I was invited to it again. Absolutely tremendous. I think the nice thing about this, because we're a smaller country, the supporters know each other better. I mean, it's amazing when I go on an away trip. The number of supporters I know down in the town or stop and talk to. And Northern Ireland's a kind of place, if you talk to each other for 5 minutes, you'll know half a dozen people mutually. And it's that kind of thing. So that very, some might call parochial side to it. I think it's just a very nice attitude the way it is. Our support is more varied than it used to be. It was really good at the Women's Euros. There was flags and things in the crowd that you wouldn't always see, and it was nice. There was a rainbow flag. I've seen some people wearing GAA tops even in the ground, which isn't something that you would necessarily see all the time, and that was good.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Conrad. I can only endorse what you've said about Northern Ireland as not just a tourist destination, a destination full stop. My family are from just over the border in Donegal there, so we spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland, and it is the most beautiful, convivial, congenial place you could go to. And I hope that people find a reason other than football to get out there as soon as you can. And we wish you all the best with your future health in particular. And we'd like to thank you so much for talking to us.
And thank you very much. It's amazing what happens between you and when you're sitting in a restaurant in Germany and you bump into somebody at the table beside you and you strike up a conversation. It's a happy circumstance, and thank you.
As I say, Kieran, I thought Conrad was really interesting. I'm also fascinated by the amount he crams into his role of president, clearly dealing with people at the very highest level of football in UEFA and dealing with fans and grassroots football at its lowest level.
Yeah, he's making me look a shirker.
Yeah. It's I'm also fascinated by that idea, Kieran, that, and we discussed it in it, there is money out there for grassroots football. It's just that, as we know from associations with charities, some people can afford to pay full-time staff to try and access that money, and some people can't. So people don't realise there will be clubs out there, there will be junior teams, women's teams, worried about funding when it's possibly there for them waiting to go on their doorstep.
That's right, and that applies not just to clubs in Northern Ireland, but for the rest of the UK as well. So as somebody that's been involved in rugby and cricket and a club that's put in funding and has benefited from that, it is a pain in the backside, but it's worth it. The outputs at the end, if you're successful, are great, and you can improve facilities. And as a nation, we want to get fitter and healthier. And team sport for me is brought me more joy than practically anything apart from the cure.
I don't. This is the place to reveal, Kieran. It just, as we don't just say goodbye to these people and then switch the machine off and leave. We just, while things are uploading, we have a chat. I went and made a cup of tea because it turns out Conrad is also a massive fan of The Cure. So it's just two middle-aged men talking about a band I care little for. But both of you, the pair of you, just your eyes lit up. I think producer guy needs to think about some kind of Cure podcast.
There's already one there.
Is there?
It's 250 episodes in.
Is it?
Yes.
So How can you talk about The Cure for 250 episodes? It's the same song. They've got a fast one and a slow one. How can you...
I think these days they've just got a slow one.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. I was in the car the other day it could only get BBC Six, and I believe the new Cure single is quite good. Just on another serious note about the Casement Stadium funding falling through, is it possible at all to quantify the long-term financial loss to Northern Ireland football, or is it a stadium that never happened, isn't going to happen, so you can't put a figure on it?
I think you always have to be a little bit cautious when there is an infrastructure spend for a specific tournament. Because, as we have seen with the London Stadium, or which was the Olympic Stadium, is that if you make a statement spending, then recovering that at a later date. And Conrad was open enough to admit that if it's big enough to satisfy UEFA's rules, which is a minimum of 34,500, then how are Northern Ireland going to fill that? In terms of their brilliant fan base, and I've met Northern Irish fans when I've been at Euros and so on, and they are just the crack is just superb. And they're an absolute credit to the national football team, and vice versa. So you'd end up with quite a few empty seats on a regular basis. And would any of the domestic teams be able to utilise it in a similar way to West Ham? I don't think so. I was looking at the accounts of Linfield earlier today. We're talking about a club with a turnover of £2.5 million a year. It's not going to fill a stadium of that nature. So there is a danger that unless you use it, and clearly with Ireland there are other sports to deal with as well. You've got to be able to fill it on a regular basis.
I've just Googled that Cure pod you told me about, Kieran, and you're quite right. 250 episodes. Episode 37 is entitled, "Have you seen the price of mascara these days?" Thank you to everyone who's donated to our pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our regular Tuesday questions pod, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X and find us on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is just out in paperback, you can find details on that same website, priceoffootball.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.